Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Randy Rice. I'm here with you on December 13th, 2024, and we're going to talk about how to test without defined requirements. I am the Senior QA Engagement Director for Marajo Technology, and we're being sponsored today by Marajo Technology, who has a fantastic team of testers. If you have projects that need tested, give me a shout, okay? So this topic actually came to be from a question that was in the last webinar that we did from one of our attendees about how do you test if you don't have very good requirements. And it kind of took me by surprise. And then as it goes, of course, after the session was over, I recall that I had this whole presentation on that very topic. So I decided to go ahead and do that topic for this webinar. Now, this is a 20-minute webinar. I have 10 hours allocated toward the end. If anyone has any questions or anything that they'd like to ask and perhaps have answered, we'll see. We will also post this webinar on our YouTube channel, our brand new YouTube channel at Marajo. And we'll also have some slides and an article for this on the Marajo blog, so you might want to check those out as well. And if you want to know when we're going to do the next webinar, it will probably be in January. Since we're getting pretty close to the Christmas holidays here, just shoot me an email, randall@marajo.tech. That will get you on my short email list of just people to notify about things like this. We're not going to spam you. We're not going to do anything like that. Anyway, it's just a way to let you know. So I'm making a bold promise being able to do this in 20 minutes. And I keep a collection of funny signs that I've seen. And so this is one that I got a few years ago. And it's kind of funny when you read the whole sign, but you know, it's all about losing weight easily, 3 months, one person 45 pounds, another person 65 pounds without no exercise. Now, it's not many people that I know that can lose weight that fast, first of all, but also that can make 2 grammatical errors in 4 words, okay? I mean, you're talking about my class of errors when you're talking about that. Anyway, kind of a funny little picture there. So the problem here that we're really trying to deal with is that, you know, a lot of people talk about requirements being the basis for their testing, and it's almost kind of like a given assumption that we're only going to test in response to some kind of requirement or specification that we've been given. But when I talk to people and ask them more about their requirements, they admit that they're really not very good if they get them at all. In fact, in the upcoming edition of the new, starting from a blank slate top 10 challenges book, the lack of requirements and good specifications is number 3 on the list of needs there. The top 3, it ranks that high. But we all know that requirements have flaws. And in fact, if there's the one thing that's been measured over the last 50 years when it comes to software is where do defects originate? And the great majority originate either in requirements or design. I'm talking about over 75% of the defects that eventually get found on a project have their origins in some kind of requirement or design-based issues. So even if you have requirements, there's a good chance you're going to have flaws in there. And that's why we do validation. Validation, by the way, is just testing without requirements. It's a real-world test, because if you only test to requirements, this is the risk, okay? If you only test to requirements, then if the requirements are flawed, then your test is going to be flawed as well. Now, I've seen a lot of methodologies come and go over the years, and everyone that comes with the promise that we're going to either eliminate requirements or reduce them greatly or deal with them some way like that. And I'll give you a guess at how many actually do deliver on that promise, and that number is approaching that, okay, approaching 0. Now, I don't mean this to be hypercritical toward developers, but developers especially seem to think that a skinny requirement is good enough. In fact, the whole thing about test-driven development was kind of about that too, but it didn't really get into requirements. It was just writing a failing test and then a good test. But developers don't think we have time for them and we don't really need them. They get a general idea and then they go start coding. Or once again, I don't want to generalize too much because there's a lot of good developers who understand the power and the need for good requirements because they have to know what to build. So combine this with a lot of companies don't have this role of BA or business analyst. And so then you have a lack of ownership as well. Who's going to take care of it? And users don't like to commit to them. That's one of the big things. You go to a user or stakeholder and say, what do you want? And they'll tell you, but then when it comes to actually signing off and saying, this is what we're committing to fund and build and all that, then the challenge gets a little bit greater. Now, so I always like to pose this question when I do my classes on requirements. If you don't have a requirement in writing, do you still have a requirement? And while you're thinking about that, I'll talk about the picture on the side of the slide here. I just happened to catch this picture close to where I live. 2 speed limit signs, 130, 140. I guess you can just kind of take your choice or drive 35 or whatever you want to do there. But actually the story behind the picture is one crew put the signs up and another crew takes the signs down. And on this short window of time, they're getting ready to do some road work and the group that was taking the signs down hadn't appeared yet. So that's how that sign came to be. Now, about the question, do we still have requirements? If you're the customer, okay, then the answer is yes. They may not be in writing. Where are they? Well, they're in everyone's mind. They're in kind of individual expectations that people might have about something. Now, from the vendor standpoint, if I don't have a requirement in writing, I might feel like I can deliver anything I want to because there's nothing specified that says I have to deliver to a particular thing. So it's kind of an interesting debate. The bottom line is you probably still have requirements. They're just not stated in a way that can actually be verified. But with all that said, I'm still a big fan of requirements. I think we need them. I think they're essential. I just think we need to do a lot better job with them. But we do need strategies on how to test when we don't have good requirements. Oh yes, Timmy, I see that question over there. Yes, but doesn't Agile solve these issues? Well, actually not. It was supposed to, but even when it came to requirements, remember early on in Agile, for those of you who might have been around that time, around the early 2000s, the story was that user stories would be a placeholder for requirements, but not a substitute for requirements. Well, that substitution thing never really happened. And so no matter what methodology you're in, if you don't know what you're building or testing, no method is going to be successful. Agile, sequential, it doesn't matter. And these other things, user stories and use cases are fine, but they don't rise to the level of requirements. Now the picture I show here, I don't know if that's been photoshopped or not, but it's kind of funny because really, in a way, that's kind of Agile when you think about it. I mean, it's not a very engineered, architected approach, but that trailer there on the bottom was probably the MVP, and then everything else is just kind of laid on top of it and tacked on top of it. And so not a great way to build an apartment building, but what you see there. Now, there could be some other reasons for testing without requirements, like commercial off-the-shelf software, software as a service. Once again, keep in mind that true validation is what you're talking about when you're talking about acceptance testing and beta testing and those kinds of tests. So here we go, the 6 ways to test without defined specifications. The first one is one of my favorites. And by the way, there's no particular order to these. They're just as I made my list. So user scenarios is the first one, usage patterns, generic test conditions, otherwise known as error guessing, generic functionality, defect-based test, and then exploratory testing. So we have 6 of them there. Now, one of the big issues here also is how do I know what constitutes correct behavior? Now, typically this is found in a requirement. And it's also known as a test oracle, the source of knowledge about the thing that you're testing. So in all the ways that I'm going to show you, you're still going to have to find someone or something to serve as this test oracle. And I'll try to give you some input on that as I go along here, but just keep in mind you'll need that. So user scenarios, number one. The key idea here is if you understand the user process and the business flow, you can cover a lot of tests very quickly by doing this decomposition process I'm going to show you here. So let's say, for example, that you have kind of an accounting system that you're going to be testing, and part of that might be penalty application, billing, reporting. You can break these down into functional areas and then break them down further into sub-functions. So let's take the penalty application. Now I'm going to go back a slide here for just a moment just to point out something. These are just the names of the sub-processes. There's no decision-making logic that we can see in this picture. It's not until we get to the process itself that we start to see some of the decisions. And each decision is going to put you into a different scenario. So as you start asking questions, well, as we run our past due invoices, are there any accounts past due? If yes, then we go on to the next item to review the invoices. If the invoices are okay, then are any past due over 90 days? If no, are there any special holds, and so forth? You can just imagine tracing through all of those lines, going everywhere, every way you can go there. You're going to come up with a lot of tests, and especially it helps if you keep these functions kind of like building blocks. So run your aging report, that could be one script. Run your past due invoices, that could be another test, another script, and so forth. And so you'll see that you can just kind of go through here, and each path through that chart then becomes a scenario that you can test. Now, the next big piece of this, though, is what do we put through the scenarios? Well, it's your data that gives life to the scenarios. So let's say we start with a customer, and then we can say, okay, we have new and we have existing customers, and then we have regular and preferred of the new customers and regular and preferred of the existing customers. So we can start out with a new customer that gets a discount. We can start out with an existing customer that is regular, gets no discount. And we can apply them, their accounts through that scenario approach. Okay, the second method is usage profiles. Now this is where you take on various user personas and types. So what would it look like if I tried to do a particular function as a novice user or an expert user, perhaps a clueless user? And I don't mean that as badly as it sounds, but someone who's never been trained, someone who is just looking at something for the very first time, how would they try to use our application? Maybe a disabled or handicapped user, or a demanding user, or even an angry user, could be some ways to look at this. And it's a good way to get a variety of perspectives. You can take one basic case and then you can modify it for all the different personas, and you can learn things from each of the different personas. Now, you may not have time to test them all, but you should at least be able to get the big ones. Now, one other thing to consider here too is you may not be aware of all the personas that might be in play in using your application. Now, number 3 is generic functionality. This is just doing the common stuff: adding, editing, deleting, searching. These are very transportable tests. You can have a list. In fact, it goes well with a checklist. I'll show you here in just a moment. The trouble with the generic functionality is you may have some unique functionality in the thing that you're testing that's not on your list of generic things. But at least to make a start, you can come up with generic functions that you test in just about anything that you test. Now, a friend of mine to kind of go along with this, friend and colleague Greg Pascal, he developed an approach called METS. It stands for the Minimal Essential Test Strategy. And it's a really quick way to do kind of like a risk-based test approach. I'm just going to show you quickly what I'm talking about here. I'm going to focus on functions. Now, there's two things that the METS grids will handle. One is functions, just how things are done, the things that should be done, like either create a customer or create an order, put something in a shopping cart, check out, those kind of things. The other is a physical grid of the things you can touch, like tapping on the OK button or tapping on the search button, those kind of things. I'm just going to stick with the functional view of this right now. So in the functional test grid, along the left-hand side, you'll see the various categories of things that you can do, like do things with accounts, do things with the shopping cart, product catalog, transactions, searches, and so forth. And then along the right-hand side, you'll see the columns for critical, high, medium, and low. And then for the accounts, a critical thing is creating an account should be possible. Logging into an account should be possible. And we just carry that thought from the critical all the way down to the very low. And once again, it's a great way to define your functions that you want to test. And it's a great way to prioritize them based on criticality. Now, one of the other cool things about METS is you can get metrics from METS. Now, the items are assessed by three things. Direct testing is what you might think of as confirmation testing, where you're testing a fix or something new. Related testing would be something that could be impacted by a change. So this would be close to integration testing. And then regression testing, these are tests that you would run on the application regardless of what's changed, just to make sure that nothing has regressed. So you'll see in this METS grid, you have all the tests out here on the left-hand side, the category, the importance, the time required, the potential severity, and then the type of testing that gets applied to it. From that, you can come up with a timing grid over here on the right to get your estimates if you like to do that. Number 4 are the generic test conditions. These are things like checklist, error guessing, transportable test. Once again, very handy because they really do give you some repeatability and consistency, and it doesn't cost much money at all to come up with these. In fact, I'm going to show a couple of examples here real quick. Just keep in mind, as we saw with the generic functionality, be careful because you might miss some very specific functions, especially those that might be new. So for example, on the functional error conditions, things like the rejection of invalid data formats, invalid data ranges, invalid data types, and so forth. And the yes or no is just to say we're going to test these or not test these. And then another example would be a unit test checklist where we're focused on the GUI. And so are all the field labels and numbers present and spelled, identified correctly? Do all the drop-down list boxes contain the required input, and so forth? Number 5 are the defect-based kind of tests. And this is where you use your data from your past defects to find new tests and to learn new things to test. It's a great way to find value from defects. In fact, it's a feedback loop that very few people close in their testing. And because of that, they miss a lot of things that they should be testing because they're not going back and looking what's failed in the past. Sampling is also really good here because defects do tend to cluster. So if you see one defect, you want to test around it to see if there might not be some others. And finally, and this might be actually one of the best ways to test without requirements, is exploratory testing. So this is not ad hoc, it's not meant to be rushed or just a cursory test. This is intended to be a very thoughtful kind of test where you're testing and learning at the same time. The thing is, you have no predefined cases or scripts, and therefore you may not even exactly know how the thing's supposed to be behaving. So one of the things about it is it a bug or a feature? That's a question that often gets asked, and sometimes you have to do some research to figure out, did the test actually pass or fail? It tends to go a lot faster than other forms of testing, and there's a way to manage it called session-based testing, in which you just block out a period of time and you're going to look at one particular aspect of the application. Now, this is not the easiest thing to train on how to do, because it really does depend a lot on the tester's ability to think creatively, to notice things, especially odd behavior. But there's been a ton of stuff published on exploratory testing, many books, but the best way to do it is just to practice it and just get good at just looking at something with fresh eyes for the first time and trying to do it. Well, that's the 20-minute mark, okay? And I made it through all the major ways to test that I can think of. Now, you might have some others, so feel free to add them in the comments if you want to. You can reach me at randall@marajo.tech. Come by to our website at marajo.tech. Like I said, I'm going to have the article, the slides up there on the blog part of the website. Also, check out our YouTube channel, where you'll find this video posted here in a couple of days, as well as some others that I'm putting up there. So thank you all for attending. I appreciate it. I don't think we're going to have any questions here on this session, but I sure appreciate you being here, and look forward to the next webinar that I can have with you sometime in January. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.